The flash burns through the morning sky over Lahore. In less than a second, the temperature at ground zero reaches 100 million degrees Celsius. The shock wave levels everything within a 5-mile radius. This isn't science fiction. This is what happens when 340 nuclear warheads meet modern warfare between two nations that share a 1,800-mile border and house nearly 1.7 billion people. You're about to discover how quickly civilization can unravel when nuclear powers go to war. It begins with something small, it always does. A terrorist attack in Kashmir, cross-border shelling, a diplomat's car bombed in New Delhi, the kind of incident that's happened dozens of times before between India and Pakistan. But this time, something different happens. This time, neither side blinks. Within hours, Indian fighter jets cross into Pakistani airspace, not for a quick surgical strike like in 2019, but for sustained bombing campaigns. Pakistan responds immediately. Their Chinese-supplied HQ-9 air defense systems lock onto incoming aircraft. The sky over Punjab fills with contrails and explosions. What makes this different from every previous conflict between these nuclear-armed neighbors? The scale. Within 48 hours, both nations have mobilized their entire military apparatus. Over 2 million soldiers are moving toward the border. Naval fleets are positioning in the Arabian Sea, and deep in underground bunkers, military commanders are receiving unprecedented orders. For the first time since 1998, when both countries tested nuclear weapons, the unthinkable becomes inevitable. Here's what most people don't understand about nuclear warfare between India and Pakistan. It's not like the Cold War scenarios between the United States and Soviet Union. Those were theoretical exercises, involving superpowers separated by oceans. This is different. This is 340 nuclear warheads, deployed between two countries that share borders, major cities within 200 miles of each other, and a combined population larger than the entire Western Hemisphere. The math is terrifying in its simplicity. Pakistan has approximately 170 nuclear warheads. India has roughly the same number. Unlike the massive hydrogen bombs that defined the Cold War, these are smaller tactical weapons. But smaller doesn't mean less devastating. Each warhead can generate the equivalent of 15 to 20 kilotons of TNT. That's comparable to the bomb that destroyed Hiroshima. When military planners run the scenarios, they focus on immediate targets. Pakistan would likely strike New Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, and Chennai. India would target Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, and Rawalpindi. But the real horror isn't in the primary targets. It's in the chain reaction that follows. Scientific models predict that even a limited nuclear exchange would kill between 50 and 125 million people in the first week. That's more than twice the total death toll of World War II, compressed into 7 days. But the immediate casualties are just the beginning. The bombs create something scientists call a nuclear winter. But that term doesn't capture the full scope of the catastrophe. When nuclear weapons detonate over major cities, they don't just kill people. They ignite massive fires that inject millions of tons of soot and debris into the atmosphere. Within days, a black cloud begins to circle the globe. The smoke from burning cities in South Asia blocks sunlight across the northern hemisphere. Average temperatures drop by 1.8 degrees Celsius. In agricultural regions, growing seasons shrink by 10 to 40 days. Crop yields collapse not just in India and Pakistan, but across Asia, Europe, and North America. The global food crisis begins within months. Countries that export grain, wheat, and rice suddenly can't feed their own populations. International trade collapses as nations hoard whatever food supplies remain. The death toll from starvation and related diseases climbs toward 2 billion people worldwide. China, despite being thousands of miles from the nuclear exchange, loses 255 million people to famine. The United States sees 5 million deaths. Even countries like Germany and France, with advanced agricultural systems, lose millions of citizens to hunger and related diseases. This is how a regional conflict becomes a global apocalypse. But the nuclear exchange itself isn't the end of the story. It's just the beginning of a cascade of catastrophes that reshape the entire world order. The global economy collapses within weeks. the Bombay Stock Exchange, one of Asia's largest financial centers, simply ceases to exist. The port of Karachi, which handles 60% of Pakistan's trade, is a radioactive wasteland. Supply chains that connect Asian manufacturing to global markets disintegrate overnight. International refugee crisis exceeds anything in human history. Survivors from the affected regions attempt to flee to neighboring countries. Bangladesh, already struggling with climate change and overpopulation, faces an influx of 20 million refugees from both sides of the border. Iran closes its borders entirely. China deploys military forces to prevent mass migration across its borders. The regional powers that might normally provide humanitarian aid are themselves struggling to survive. The United States, dealing with crop failures and internal unrest, can't mount the kind of massive relief operation that followed previous disasters. Europe, facing its own agricultural crisis, has no surplus resources to share. And then there's the radiation. The fallout from 340 nuclear weapons doesn't respect national borders. Radioactive particles spread across Central Asia, reaching as far as Afghanistan, Iran, and Western China. Areas larger than the entire United Kingdom become uninhabitable for decades. The Indus River, which provides water for 180 million people, becomes contaminated with radioactive isotopes. In the aftermath, the most heartbreaking statistics aren't about the immediate casualties, they're about the children. Radiation exposure causes a spike in birth defects and childhood cancers across South Asia. Malnutrition, from the global food crisis, stunts the development of an entire generation. Children born in the year following the nuclear exchange show dramatically higher rates of cognitive impairment, not just in India and Pakistan, but across the developing world. Educational systems collapse. In the affected regions, schools are either destroyed or converted to refugee camps. In countries suffering from famine, children are withdrawn from school to help find food. The ripple effects continue for decades as these children grow up without basic education or proper health care. The psychological trauma extends far beyond the immediate victims. Survivors develop what researchers call nuclear anxiety disorder, a condition that affects their ability to form relationships, maintain employment, or raise families. Suicide rates skyrocket not just in South Asia but globally as people lose hope for the future. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this hypothetical war is how easily it could have been prevented. The initial incident that triggered the conflict, whether a terrorist attack or border skirmish, was the kind of event that both nations had managed dozens of times before through diplomatic channels. But in this alternate timeline, pride and political pressure override rational decision-making. Leaders on both sides, facing domestic criticism for appearing weak, choose escalation over negotiation. Military commanders, trained to respond to threats with overwhelming force, can't find a way to de-escalate once the shooting starts. The international community, distracted by other crises and confident that previous tensions had always been resolved peacefully, fails to intervene decisively in the crucial first 48 hours when diplomatic solutions were still possible. The nuclear exchange lasts only 6 days, but its effects reshape human civilization for generations. What makes this scenario particularly terrifying is how modern technology accelerates the path to nuclear war. Both India and Pakistan have developed sophisticated early warning systems designed to detect incoming missiles. But these same systems, in a crisis, compress decision-making timelines to mere minutes. When Pakistani radar operators detect what appears to be an incoming missile strike, they have less than 5 minutes to determine whether it's a conventional weapon or a nuclear attack. The margin for error is essentially zero. In this high-stress environment, a single miscalculation or equipment malfunction can trigger a nuclear response. The weapons themselves are more dangerous than their Cold War predecessors. Modern nuclear weapons are designed to be smaller, more accurate, and easier to deploy. This makes them more likely to be used in a crisis because military commanders see them as more manageable than the massive hydrogen bombs of the 1960s. But manageable is an illusion. Once nuclear weapons are used, even tactically, the escalation becomes almost impossible to control. Each side, seeing their cities destroyed, feels justified in responding with greater force. The conflict spirals beyond any rational military objective. In the years following the nuclear exchange, the most striking thing about the affected regions is the silence. Cities that once housed millions become ghost towns. The constant hum of traffic, construction, and human activity is replaced by an eerie quiet, broken only by the wind moving through empty buildings. Wildlife slowly returns to the abandoned areas, creating an unexpected ecological recovery in the midst of human catastrophe. But this recovery comes at an unprecedented cost. The same radiation that forced humans to flee also creates genetic mutations in animals and plants that persist for generations. Archaeological teams, working decades later in protective suits, find evidence of how quickly civilization can disappear. Libraries full of books that no one will ever read. Hospitals with medical equipment that could have saved lives if anyone had been left to operate it. Schools with children's artwork still pinned to bulletin boards. This story of nuclear war between India and Pakistan is fiction. But the weapons are real. The casualty estimates are based on scientific studies. The global consequences are drawn from climate and agricultural models. The only fictional element is the decision to use these weapons. That decision remains in the hands of political leaders who, like all humans, are capable of making catastrophic mistakes under pressure. The nuclear arsenals of India and Pakistan continue to grow. The tensions that could trigger a conflict remain unresolved. The international mechanisms for preventing nuclear war remain fragile. The mathematics of nuclear warfare are unchanging. The human capacity for both wisdom and folly is not. We have built a world where two nations, in a moment of anger or fear, can end civilization as we know it. The question isn't whether such a conflict is possible. The question is whether we're wise enough to prevent it before it's too late. The flash over Lahore, the dying children, the silent cities, the 2 billion deaths, the decades of recovery. All of this remains hypothetical. But only barely. Only because so far, when faced with the ultimate choice, leaders have chosen restraint over destruction. How long can we count on restraint? How long can we live with weapons that could end the world in 6 days? The answer to those questions will determine whether the story you've just heard remains fiction or becomes the most tragic chapter in human history. In the end, the choice is ours, all of ours, and we must choose wisely because there are no second chances with nuclear weapons. There are no do-overs with civilization. There is only the hope that wisdom will prevail over the technology of mutual destruction. The sun still rises over Lahore. Children still play in the streets of Mumbai. Farmers still plant crops in the Punjab. But all of this exists in the shadow of 340 nuclear warheads and the knowledge that everything we value could disappear in less than a week. That knowledge should terrify us. And that terror should motivate us to build a world where this story never becomes reality.